The heat pressed down from above like a weight she could feel in her bones, and Maya wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust across her skin. She was 12 years old, but carried herself with the careful exhaustion of someone much older, someone who had learned too early that the world did not offer kindness freely. Her bare feet moved slowly across the scorching pavement, toes blackened with grime from walking these streets since dawn, and the small woven basket she carried held perhaps 24 pieces of homemade toffee wrapped in scraps of wax paper. Each piece represented hours of work in their cramped kitchen, the sugar carefully rationed, the butter bought with coins she had begged from strangers the week before. Her stomach had been empty since the previous evening, a dull ache she had learned to ignore, and she kept her eyes fixed on the row of houses ahead, each one larger and more imposing than the last. This neighborhood existed in a different world from her own. The lawns here stretched wide and impossibly green, sprinklers spinning lazily in the afternoon sun, and the houses rose behind tall gates like fortresses built to keep people like her on the outside. She had knocked on 17 doors already that day. Most had refused to open. 3 had cracked open just enough for suspicious eyes to peer out before dismissing her with a curt shake of the head. One man had yelled at her to leave before he called the police. She had not cried. Her mother had taught her that tears solved nothing, that survival required a spine made of iron, and Maya had internalized that lesson completely. Her mother lay at home now, too weak to stand without help, her body consumed by an illness they could not afford to treat properly. The medicines the clinic had prescribed cost more than they made in a month. Her grandmother had been in the hospital for 3 weeks, her condition worsening with each passing day, and the bills were piling up like storm clouds on a horizon they could not escape. Maya sold these candies because it was the only thing she knew how to do, the only way she could contribute, and she walked these wealthy streets because desperate times demanded desperate measures. She did not think about the unfairness of it. She simply put one foot in front of the other and kept moving. The gate appeared ahead of her like something from a storybook, wrought iron, painted glossy black, and beyond it stretched a driveway that curved through manicured gardens toward a house that seemed less like a home and more like a monument. Maya stopped walking. Her breath caught in her chest. She had seen wealth before, had glimpsed it through car windows and behind restaurant glass. But this was different. This was wealth that announced itself without shame, that sprawled across acres of land as if space itself could be owned and hoarded. The house rose 3 stories high, white columns framing a massive front door, windows glinting in the late afternoon sun, like watching eyes. For a moment she considered walking past, convinced that no one here would buy candy from a dirty child, but then she thought of her mother's labored breathing, her grandmother's frail hand squeezing her own, and she walked forward. Her finger pressed the small button beside the gate. A buzzer sounded somewhere deep within the property, electronic and sharp, and Maya waited. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. The heat continued to bear down. A bead of sweat rolled down her spine beneath her faded dress. She shifted the basket to her other arm and was about to turn away when she heard footsteps approaching, hard shoes against stone, and then the gate mechanism clicked and began to swing open. The man who appeared before her stood tall and straight, his shoulders squared inside a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His face held the kind of symmetry that suggested good breeding and better nutrition, strong jaw clean-shaven, dark hair swept back with not a strand out of place, and his eyes studied her with an expression she could not quite read. Surprise, perhaps. Confusion. He looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms and expensive restaurants, not standing at a gate talking to a child selling candy. Maya swallowed hard and forced herself to speak. "Sir, would you like to buy some toffee to help my grandmother?" Her voice came out smaller than she had intended, but clear enough. She held up the basket so he could see the wrapped pieces inside. David Thornhill had been on his way to his study when the gate buzzer had sounded. He had not been expecting anyone, and his household staff typically handled any deliveries or visitors, but something had compelled him to answer it himself. Perhaps it was the restlessness that had plagued him all day, the vague dissatisfaction that no amount of work seemed to cure. Now he stood looking down at a child who appeared to be at least 2 meals away from proper nourishment, her dress patched and sun-faded, her feet bare and dirty, and he felt a tightness in his chest that he could not quite name. "Wait here," he said, his voice emerging more gruffly than he had intended. He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving the gate open behind him, and Maya watched him disappear through the massive front door. She stood very still. The gate remained open. The man had not told her to leave. She could see the edge of the house from where she stood, could glimpse the manicured lawn and flowering bushes that lined the walkway, and curiosity pulled at her like a physical force. She took one careful step forward, then another. No alarm sounded. No one emerged to send her away. The interior of the estate beckoned, and Maya found herself moving closer, drawn by a mixture of wonder and reckless daring. The front door had been left slightly ajar. Through the opening she could see a glimpse of marble flooring, cream-colored and polished to a mirror shine, and the edge of what looked like an ornate table holding a vase of fresh flowers. The air that drifted out felt cool, air-conditioned to a temperature she had only experienced in shopping malls when she'd been younger, back before things had gotten so difficult. She hesitated at the threshold. This was wrong. She knew it was wrong. She was not supposed to enter uninvited, but the man had left the door open, had left the gate open, and some part of her reasoned that if he had truly wanted her to stay outside, he would have closed both behind him. Maya stepped inside. The coolness hit her immediately, raising goosebumps on her sun-heated skin. The entry hall stretched before her like a museum gallery, walls painted soft ivory and decorated with oil paintings in gilded frames. The floor beneath her dirty feet gleamed so brightly she could see her reflection, distorted and wavering. A chandelier hung overhead, crystal teardrops catching the light from windows she could not see. Everything smelled clean, like furniture polish and fresh flowers and money. She moved forward slowly, her eyes wide, taking in details that seemed impossible. A side table with legs carved like lions' paws. A mirror framed in what might have been actual gold. A hallway leading deeper into the house, and along that hallway, photographs. She walked toward them without meaning to. Her feet carried her forward while her mind remained stunned by the opulence surrounding her. The photographs hung in careful arrangement, black and white images mixed with color, and her eyes moved from frame to frame without really seeing them until suddenly they focused and her breath stopped completely. The photograph was not large, perhaps 8 by 10 inches, and it hung at the end of the hallway in a frame of brushed gold. The image showed a younger version of the man who had just left, his face less weathered but unmistakably the same, and beside him stood a woman. The woman was young, early 20s perhaps, her dark hair pulled back from her face, her smile radiant and genuine, and she held the man's arm with obvious affection. The woman was her mother. There was absolutely no doubt in Maya's mind. She had seen enough photographs of her mother from before, from the time when things had been different, to recognize that face, the shape of the eyes, the curve of the mouth, the small beauty mark on the left cheekbone. This was Rachel, her mother, younger and healthy and happy in a way Maya had never witnessed in person. Her legs felt weak. The basket slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a soft thud, pieces of toffee spilling across the pristine marble. Maya did not notice. Her entire focus remained fixed on the photograph, her mind racing through impossible questions. Why would her mother's picture be hanging in this house? Why would she be photographed with this wealthy man? Her mother had told her so many times that her father had died before she was born. that there were no other relatives, that they had no one but each other and her grandmother. But here was evidence of something else entirely, something hidden, and Maya felt the foundations of her understanding beginning to crack. David returned from the interior of the house with several bills folded in his hand, more than the candy was worth, far more, because something about the child's obvious desperation had struck a chord in him. He would give her the money, buy the entire basket if necessary, and perhaps add a bit more for the medical expenses she had mentioned. But when he entered the hallway and saw where she stood, saw what she was looking at, the money slipped from his fingers and drifted to the floor unnoticed. The girl stood frozen before the photograph of Rachel. His Rachel, the woman he had loved with every fiber of his being, the woman he had been prepared to marry, the woman who had been taken from him over a decade ago in a car accident that had left him hollow inside. He had mourned her properly, had attended the funeral, had spent years learning to live with the grief, and yet here was this child staring at her image as if she recognized her. "Why is my mum's picture in your house?" Maya's voice came out thin and shaky, barely above a whisper. David heard the words, but they did not immediately make sense. His brain struggled to process them. Your mum. This child was claiming that Rachel was her mother, but Rachel was dead. Rachel had died 12 years ago. The funeral had been closed casket, but his mother had handled all the arrangements, had shown him the death certificate, had guided him through those dark months, with firm insistence that he needed to move forward. He had trusted her completely. But now this girl stood before him, claiming something impossible. He took a step closer. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. He stared at the child's face, really looked at her for the first time, and felt something cold spread through his chest, the shape of her nose, the line of her jaw, the way her eyebrows drew together when she was upset. She looked like Rachel. Dear God, she looked exactly like Rachel. "What's your name?" The question came out hoarse. "Maya," she answered, still staring at the photograph. "Maya Brennan." "And your mother's name?" He already knew the answer, but needed to hear it anyway. "Rachel Brennan." The hallway seemed to tilt around him. David gripped the edge of a console table to steady himself, his knuckles going white. Rachel Brennan. The same name. It could not be coincidence. Could not be some bizarre mistake. But how? How could Rachel be alive? How could she have a daughter this age? The girl appeared to be 11 or 12, which would mean she had been born right around the time Rachel had supposedly died, which meant that Rachel might have been pregnant when she disappeared. He moved to the nearest chair and sank into it without grace, his legs simply giving out beneath him. His hands came up to cover his face, and he sat that way for several long seconds, his entire world reorganizing itself around this new, impossible information. When he finally lowered his hands and looked at Maya again, she was watching him with wide, fearful eyes, her body tensed as if ready to run. "This woman," he said, his voice unsteady, "was my fiancée. She died over 12 years ago." "She's my mom," Maya said firmly, despite the fear in her eyes. "She didn't die. She's sick right now, but she's alive." The words hit him like physical blows. He tried to stand, tried to reach for her, tried to say something that would make sense, but Maya's fear won out. She grabbed her basket from the floor, snatched up the scattered pieces of candy with trembling hands, and ran. Her bare feet slapped against the marble floor as she fled toward the open door, and David lunged after her too late. By the time he reached the front entrance, she was already through the gate, already racing down the street with her basket clutched to her chest, and no amount of calling after her would make her stop. David stood in the doorway breathing hard, his heart hammering against his ribs. The street beyond the gate stretched empty in both directions, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. The girl was gone. But the truth she had brought with her remained, heavy and undeniable. He went back inside slowly, closed the door, and leaned against it. His eyes moved to the photograph still hanging on the wall. Rachel's smile frozen in that moment of happiness they had shared before everything had fallen apart. If what the girl said was true, if Rachel had not died, if she had instead disappeared and raised a daughter alone, then everything he believed about the past was a lie. And if it was a lie, someone had constructed it deliberately. Someone had wanted him to believe Rachel was dead. Someone had orchestrated her disappearance and then covered it up with false documents and a fabricated funeral. His mother. The realization dropped into his mind like a stone into still water. His mother had been the one to bring him the news of Rachel's death. His mother had handled all the arrangements. His mother had shown him the certificate, had organized the service, had made sure he never saw the body. His mother had never liked Rachel, had considered her unsuitable, had made her disapproval clear at every opportunity. What if she had done something unforgivable? What if she had driven Rachel away, threatened her, paid her off, made her vanish? The thought made him sick, but he could not dismiss it. David pushed away from the door and walked through the house to his study, his mind churning. He needed to find Maya again. He needed to know everything. He needed to understand what had happened and why Rachel had allowed him to believe she was dead. But more than anything, he needed to know if that child was his daughter. The timing fit. The resemblance was there. If Rachel had been pregnant when she disappeared, if she had carried his child and raised her alone in poverty while he lived in this mansion surrounded by empty luxury, then he had lost more than just the woman he loved. He had lost years with a daughter he never knew existed. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of security. When the man answered, David spoke with forced calm. "I need you to find someone. A girl, around 12 years old, selling candy in the neighborhoods. Her name is Maya Brennan. I need to know where she lives, who she lives with, everything. And I need it done quietly." The security chief asked no questions, simply confirmed he understood and would begin immediately. David ended the call and sank into his desk chair. The photograph on his desk showed him shaking hands with some dignitary at a charity event, both of them smiling for the camera, and he stared at his own face without recognition. He had built this life after losing Rachel, had thrown himself into work and business expansion, had accumulated wealth and property and influence, and none of it had filled the void she had left behind. Now he discovered that void had been manufactured, that his grief had been based on a lie, and the rage building inside him had nowhere to go because the person most likely responsible was already dead. His mother had passed away 2 years ago, taking her secrets with her. Maya ran until her lungs burned and her legs shook, and then she kept running. The wealthy neighborhood gave way to middle-class streets, which gradually transformed into the shabby blocks she knew as home. She did not slow down until she reached the narrow alley beside the building where she and her mother lived, and then she leaned against the rough brick wall and gasped for breath. Her mind could not stop replaying what she had seen. The photograph, the man's reaction, the way he had looked at her as if she were a ghost. He had said her mother was his fiancée. He had said she died, but her mother was alive. Her mother had always been alive. So why did this wealthy man believe otherwise? She climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment slowly, her legs heavy with exhaustion and confusion. The door was unlocked because the lock had been broken for months, and they had nothing worth stealing anyway. Inside, the single room that served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space felt stifling despite the open windows. Her mother lay on the thin mattress in the corner, her breathing shallow, her face pale against the dingy pillow. Maya crossed to her side and knelt down, placing one hand on her mother's arm. "Mom," she whispered. Rachel's eyes opened slowly. She managed a weak smile. "Did you sell anything, sweetheart?" Maya shook her head. The lie came easily because the truth was too large, too complicated. Not much, but I'll try again tomorrow. She did not mention the mansion, did not mention the photograph, or the man who looked at her with such shock. Something inside her understood that speaking those words aloud would change everything, would crack open secrets her mother had spent years keeping sealed, and Maya was not ready yet. She needed time to think, time to understand. So she said nothing, just held her mother's hand and listened to her labored breathing until sleep claimed them both. Days passed. David's security team searched the poorer sections of the city, asking questions in markets and clinics and street corners. But Maya had vanished as thoroughly as if she had never existed. David grew increasingly frustrated, unable to work, unable to think about anything except the mystery that girl represented. He paced his study at night, staring at Rachel's photograph, remembering every detail of their time together. They had met at a charity function. She had been working as a server, moving through the crowd with practiced grace, and something about her had caught his attention immediately. Not just her beauty, though she was beautiful, it was something deeper, a warmth in her eyes, a kindness in the way she spoke to people. He had found excuses to talk to her throughout the evening, and by the end of the night he had convinced her to let him take her to dinner. His mother had disapproved from the start. Rachel came from nothing, had no family connections, no education beyond high school, no prospects. But David had not cared. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had felt genuine happiness. They had dated for 18 months. He had proposed on a beach at sunset, had given her a necklace with a heart-shaped pendant and a blue stone, and when she had said yes, he had believed their future was secure. But then his mother's opposition had intensified. There had been arguments, threats disguised as concerns, and Rachel had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He had attributed it to wedding stress, had assured her everything would be fine once they were married. And then one morning, she was simply gone. No note, no explanation. His mother had come to him a week later with news of the accident, and he had never questioned it because why would he? Why would his own mother lie about something like that? Now he knew why. Because Rachel had been pregnant, and his mother would have seen that as the ultimate threat, the ultimate trap. She would have done anything to break them apart, and apparently she had succeeded beyond what he had imagined possible. David went to his mother's estate on the 7th day of searching. The house had been closed since her death, maintained by a property management company, and he had not visited in months. He let himself in with the key he still carried, and walked through rooms that smelled of dust and old furniture. Everything remained exactly as it had been. His mother had been a woman of habit, of order, and the evidence of her control extended to every corner of this place. He began searching methodically, opening drawers and examining closets, looking for anything that might confirm his suspicions. In her private study, locked in a drawer of her desk, he found a folder. Inside were documents that made his blood run cold. A contract signed by Rachel, agreeing to leave the city and never contact him again in exchange for a sum of money. A falsified death certificate, letters from a lawyer detailing the arrangements. And at the bottom, a note in his mother's handwriting. Took care of the girl problem. She will not be an issue. David read those words 3 times, each time feeling the rage build higher in his chest. His mother had known Rachel was pregnant, had known and had driven her away anyway, had threatened her into signing away her entire future, had then fabricated an elaborate lie to ensure he never looked for her. He took the folder with him when he left the house. He did not lock the door behind him. He got into his car and drove back to his own estate and sat in his study staring at the evidence of his mother's cruelty until darkness fell outside the windows. When his phone finally rang with news from his security team, he answered immediately. "We found her," the security chief said, "the girl. She lives in an apartment building in the Riverside district." Third floor. We have the address. David's hand tightened on the phone. Good. Don't approach. Just keep the location under observation and let me know if anything changes. He ended the call and sat in silence. Now that he knew where to find her, he felt suddenly uncertain. How did he approach this? What did he say? He could not simply show up and demand answers. The girl had run from him once already, but he had to do something. He had to know the truth. Maya continued selling candy, though her heart was no longer in it. She moved through the streets mechanically, offering her wares without hope, and most days she sold nothing at all. Her mind kept returning to the mansion, to the photograph, to the man's shocked face. She wanted to talk to her mother about it, but fear held her back. Fear that asking questions would hurt her mother, would dredge up a past Rachel clearly wanted to keep buried. So Maya remained silent, and the weight of secrets pressed down on her. One afternoon, as she walked home with her empty basket, she saw him, the man from the mansion. He stood at the corner of her street, clearly out of place in his expensive clothes. And when their eyes met across the distance, she froze. He made no move toward her, just stood there watching, and after a long moment, he raised one hand in a small wave. Maya did not wave back. She turned and ran into her building, up the stairs, and burst into the apartment where her mother lay resting. "He's here," she gasped out. "The man from the mansion." "He found us." Rachel's eyes went wide with terror. She struggled to sit up, her thin arms shaking with the effort. "What man? What are you talking about?" And then Maya told her everything. The mansion, the gate, the photograph on the wall, the man's reaction when she said Rachel was her mother, the other photographs he had shown her, including one where Rachel wore the necklace she still wore every day, even now. All of it came tumbling out in a rush of words, and Rachel listened with a hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When Maya finished, silence filled the apartment. Rachel looked at her daughter with an expression of such pain and regret that Maya felt her own eyes begin to burn with tears. "That man," Rachel said slowly, "is David Thornhill. He was the love of my life. We were going to be married, and he is your father." Maya stared at her mother, unable to speak. The truth she had suspected, the truth she had hoped against hope was real, had just been confirmed. The wealthy man in the mansion was her father, which meant her mother had lied to her for her entire life about him being dead. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you say he died?" Rachel closed her eyes. "Because I was trying to protect you. Because his mother threatened to destroy us both if I didn't disappear. Because I thought if I told you the truth, you would try to find him, and I couldn't risk what might happen if his mother discovered you existed." "But she's gone now, isn't she?" Maya said. "You said he was alone in that huge house. There was no one else there." Rachel nodded slowly. "His mother died 2 years ago. I heard about it through old connections. But by then so much time had passed, and I was already sick, and I convinced myself it was better to leave things as they were. I never imagined you would find him by accident." "He's outside right now," Maya whispered. "He's standing on our street." Rachel's face went even paler. She tried to stand, but her legs would not support her weight. Maya helped her mother to the window, and they looked down together. 3 stories below, David Thornhill stood on the corner, hands in his pockets, looking up at their building. Even from this distance they could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself as if braced for impact. "I have to talk to him," Rachel said quietly. "After all these years, I owe him that much." David had been standing on the corner for 20 minutes when he saw movement in a 3rd-floor window. 2 figures, one small and one taller, both looking down at him. He recognized Maya immediately, and the taller figure beside her had to be Rachel. His heart began to race. He had played this moment over and over in his mind since discovering the truth, had imagined 1,000 different ways it might unfold, but now that it was actually happening, he found himself paralyzed. Then the figures disappeared from the window. A few minutes later, the building's front door opened, and Maya emerged. She walked toward him slowly, her expression wary, and when she reached him, she stopped a few feet away. "My mom wants to talk to you," she said, "but she can't come down. She's too sick. You have to come up." David nodded. His throat felt tight. "Will you take me to her?" Maya studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. Then she turned and led him into the building. The stairs were narrow and dark, the paint peeling from the walls, and with each step, David felt the gulf between his world and theirs widening. This was where his daughter had grown up, these stained walls and broken floorboards, this building that smelled of mildew and cooking grease, while he had lived in a mansion with more rooms than he could use. The apartment door stood open. Maya led him inside, and David stepped into a space barely larger than his bedroom closet. One room, a hot plate on a counter, a mattress on the floor, clothes hanging from hooks on the wall. And there, struggling to stand near the window, was Rachel. She looked nothing like the woman in his photographs. She had aged 20 years in 12, her body thin to the point of frailty, her hair streaked with premature grey. But her eyes were the same. Those eyes he had loved, now filled with fear and pain, and something that might have been hope. Rachel. Her name came out as barely a whisper. She steadied herself against the wall. "Hello, David." They stared at each other across the small space. 12 years of separation and lies and grief hung between them like a physical barrier. Maya moved to her mother's side, ready to catch her if she fell, and the gesture broke something inside David's chest. This was his daughter, this brave, cautious child who had survived in poverty because of his mother's cruelty and his own ignorance. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question emerged harsh, despite his attempt at control. "Why did you let me think you were dead?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Because your mother threatened to kill me if I didn't leave. Because she said if I ever told you I was pregnant, she would make sure I disappeared for real. Because I was terrified and alone, and I thought keeping you in the dark was the only way to keep Maya safe." David felt the words like blows. "My mother told me you died in a car accident. She showed me a death certificate. She organized a funeral. I mourned you. I spent years mourning you while you were alive." "I know," Rachel's voice broke. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you 1,000 times, but I was so afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid I wouldn't protect you? Afraid I wouldn't choose you over my mother?" His voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "Afraid she would hurt Maya," Rachel said, and the words came out fierce despite her weakened state. "Your mother made it clear that if I stayed, if I fought back, she would find a way to destroy me and any child I carried. She had money and power and connections. I had nothing. What was I supposed to do?" David had no answer. He thought of his mother, of her cold certainty and her absolute conviction that she knew what was best. She would have done exactly what Rachel described, would have seen a pregnant girlfriend as a disaster to be managed and eliminated. The realization made him sick. "I found documents in her house," he said quietly. "A contract you signed, letters from her lawyer. I know what she did." Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She gave me money to leave. Enough to start somewhere new. I thought about refusing, but I was pregnant and alone and terrified. So I took it and I ran. I changed my name, tried to disappear completely. When Maya was born, I told her you had died because it seemed easier than explaining that your grandmother would kill us if she found out we existed." David looked at Maya, who stood watching them both with wide eyes. She said nothing, just gripped her mother's arm and waited. How much had this child been forced to understand too early? How much had she carried without complaint? "I want to help," he said. "Both of you. Let me help." Rachel shook her head. "We don't need charity. It's not charity. Maya is my daughter. He stopped, unsure what Rachel was to him now, his former fiancée, the woman he had never stopped loving, the mother of his child. "Please, let me do something." Rachel looked at Maya, some silent communication passing between them. Then she nodded slowly. "Maya's grandmother, my mother, is in the hospital. The bills are more than we can manage. If you could help with that, I would be grateful." "Done," David said immediately. "And your medical treatment too, whatever you need. I don't want to owe you. You don't owe me anything. I owe you 12 years of my daughter's life." The words hung in the small room. Maya looked up at him, and David saw his own features reflected in her face, undeniable proof of their connection. He wanted to reach out, to hug her, to promise that everything would be different from now on. But he remained still, knowing that earning her trust would take time. "There's one thing I need to know for certain," he said carefully. "I would like us to take a DNA test, not because I doubt you, but because I need to be absolutely sure. Will you agree to that?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, if that's what you need." David pulled out his phone and made a call. Within 30 minutes, a private testing service had been arranged, samples collected from both him and Maya in the cramped apartment. The technician promised results within a week. When the woman left, an uncomfortable silence settled over them. "What happens now?" Maya asked, her voice small. David looked at her and tried to smile, though his face felt stiff. "Now we get to know each other. If that's all right with you." Maya glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragement. "I guess so," Maya said. It was not the enthusiastic response he had hoped for, but it was a start. David stayed for another hour, asking careful questions, learning about their lives. Rachel told him about the years of moving from place to place, always afraid his mother's investigators would find them. She told him about the jobs she had worked, the struggles to keep them fed and housed, the growing illness that had finally made it impossible for her to work at all. Maya listened silently, and David wondered how much of this she had already known versus how much was new information. When he finally left, promising to return the next day, David walked down the stairs and out into the evening air, feeling as if he had been turned inside out. Everything he thought he knew about his life had been proven false, but beneath the anger and grief, something else was growing. Hope. The fragile, tentative hope that maybe he could still build something from the wreckage of the past. He returned the next day with groceries, with medicine, with a check that would cover Rachel's mother's hospital bills, and then some. He returned the day after that, and the day after that, each time staying a little longer, talking a little more easily. Maya remained cautious around him, but slowly began to warm up, asking questions about his work and his house, and whether he had any pets. He answered everything honestly, trying to give her the space to decide for herself what kind of relationship they might have. On the 5th day, he brought dinner from an expensive restaurant, far too much food for 3 people, but he had not known what to order. They sat on the floor of the small apartment, because there was no table, and ate pasta and roasted vegetables and fresh bread, and for the first time David felt something like normalcy beginning to emerge. Rachel looked slightly stronger, the medicine he had arranged already making a difference. Maya laughed at something he said, a genuine laugh that lit up her face, and David felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said as they finished eating. "Of course. If you're really my dad, where have you been my whole life?" The question was direct, unflinching, and absolutely fair. David met her gaze steadily. "I didn't know you existed." Your mother and I were separated before she knew she was pregnant, and my mother made sure I believed she had died. I would have been there if I had known. I want you to believe that." "Do you believe it, Mom?" Maya asked, turning to Rachel. Rachel looked at David with an expression that held too many emotions to name. "Yes," she said finally. "I believe he's telling the truth. Your grandmother was very good at controlling things, at making sure everything went the way she wanted." "She sounds awful," Maya said bluntly. "She was," David admitted. "In many ways she was." The DNA test results arrived on the 8th day. David opened the envelope with shaking hands, though he already knew what it would say. The numbers on the page confirmed it with scientific certainty. 99.9% probability of paternity. Maya was his daughter. He had a child. All the years he had spent building his empire, accumulating wealth and success, and the most important thing in his life had been growing up in poverty a few miles away, unknown and unreachable. He called Rachel immediately. The results came back. "She's mine." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Rachel's voice, thick with emotion. "I know. Can I come over?" "Yes." He drove faster than he should have, the envelope clutched in one hand, his heart racing in his chest. When he reached the apartment and climbed those narrow stairs, he found Rachel and Maya waiting together, holding hands. He showed them the results and watched Maya's face as she read the numbers, saw the moment the reality of it settled into her bones. "So you're really my dad," she said, looking up at him. "Yes." "What does that mean?" "What happens now?" David knelt down so they were eye to eye. "That means I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me. It means you'll never have to sell candy on the street again. It means your mother will get the medical care she needs. It means you have family and a home, and someone who will protect you and care for you. That's what it means." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what to call you." "You can call me David for now. We'll figure out the rest as we go." She nodded, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. David reached out hesitantly, and she stepped into his arms, letting him hold her for the first time as father and daughter. Over her head he met Rachel's eyes and saw tears streaming down her face too. They had all lost so much, but maybe somehow they could begin to rebuild. David insisted on moving them out of that apartment immediately. Rachel resisted at first, her pride making her reluctant to accept such dramatic help. But when David pointed out that her continued health required better living conditions, she relented. He rented them a small house in a decent neighborhood, furnished it completely, and set up accounts to cover all their expenses. He wanted to invite them to live in his mansion, but Rachel had made it clear she needed time, needed to process everything, needed to maintain some sense of independence. He respected that. Even as part of him wanted to keep them close, where he could see them, where he could make sure they were safe. Maya adjusted to their new circumstances with remarkable resilience. The house had a yard where she could play, her own bedroom with an actual bed, and more food in the kitchen than she knew what to do with. She stopped selling candy. Instead, she spent her days exploring the neighborhood, making friends with other children, and slowly learning to be a child again, rather than a miniature adult carrying the weight of her family's survival. David visited daily, sometimes twice daily, his business empire running itself, while he focused on building a relationship with his daughter. They went to parks together, to movies, to restaurants where Maya stared wide-eyed at menus longer than her arm. He bought her clothes and books and toys, everything she had never had, and watched her face light up with each new gift. But more than the material things, he gave her time and attention, listening to her stories, answering her endless questions, teaching her to play chess, and explaining his work in simplified terms she could understand. Rachel recovered slowly but steadily, the medications and proper nutrition working small miracles. The color returned to her face, and she gained back some of the weight she had lost. David arranged for her mother to be transferred to a better hospital where the treatment was more aggressive, and though the elderly woman's prognosis remained uncertain, at least she was comfortable and receiving proper care. Rachel visited her every day, and sometimes David drove her there, waiting in the lobby while mother and daughter spent time together. The relationship between David and Rachel remained complex. They were not strangers exactly, but neither were they the people who had loved each other 12 years ago. Too much had happened. Too much pain had accumulated. They moved around each other carefully, polite and considerate, but with an underlying tension that neither knew quite how to address. Sometimes David would catch Rachel looking at him with an expression of such profound sadness that he had to turn away. Other times he would see something warmer in her eyes, some echo of what they had once shared, and hope would flare in his chest before he suppressed it. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Rachel invited him to stay for coffee. They sat in her small kitchen, the silence stretching comfortably between them for the first time in weeks. "I never stopped loving you," David said suddenly, the words emerging without permission. "Even when I thought you were dead. Even after all these years, I never moved on." Rachel looked down at her coffee cup. "I never stopped loving you either. But I don't know if that matters anymore. We're different people now, are we? Or are we just older and more careful? David, you live in a mansion. You run a business empire. You move in circles I can't even imagine. I raised our daughter in poverty. I let you believe I was dead. How do we come back from that?" "We take it one day at a time," he said. "We see where it goes. We don't have to decide everything right now." Rachel met his eyes across the small table. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," he admitted, "but I'll take whatever you're willing to give." She did not respond immediately, but her hand moved across the table to rest on top of his. They sat like that for a long time, connected by that simple touch, and for the first time since the truth had come to light, David felt something like peace settle over him. The weeks turned into months. David continued to visit, continued to build his relationship with Maya, and slowly the awkwardness between him and Rachel began to ease. They fell into rhythms and routines, Sunday dinners together, Wednesday movie nights, Saturday morning breakfasts before Maya's art class, which David had enrolled her in after noticing her talent for drawing. The house filled with Maya's artwork, colorful pieces depicting families and houses and bright suns, and David treasured each one. Maya started calling him Dad. It happened gradually, naturally, no dramatic moment of decision. One day she just said, "Dad, can you help me with this?" And David's heart had nearly stopped. From then on, it was simply how she addressed him, and each time he heard it, the word felt like a gift he had not earned, but desperately wanted to deserve. Rachel's health continued to improve until her doctors declared her in stable condition, though she would need ongoing treatment. Her mother eventually recovered enough to leave the hospital and moved into the house with them. A frail but sharp-eyed woman who watched David with open suspicion whenever he visited. But when she saw how happy Maya was, how well cared for, some of her hostility softened. David dealt with his feelings about his mother's actions through long sessions with a therapist he had finally consented to see. The anger and betrayal remained, but talking through it helped him understand that his mother had acted from her own warped sense of protection, unable to see past her prejudices and need for control. It did not excuse what she had done, but it gave him a framework for processing the grief of losing not just Rachel all those years ago, but his relationship with his mother as well. He would never forgive her, but he could at least begin to move forward. 6 months after the DNA results had confirmed Maya's paternity, David made a decision. He could not continue living in the mansion alone while his daughter and the woman he loved lived in a rented house across town. It was time to either fully commit to this family or walk away, and walking away had never been a real option. He approached Rachel one evening when Maya was at a friend's house. "I want you to move into the mansion. Both of you. Your mother too, if she's willing. I have more than enough space, and it doesn't make sense for us to live separately when we're trying to be a family." Rachel looked at him carefully. "Is that what we're doing? Trying to be a family? Isn't it?" She took a breath. "David, if we move in with you, people are going to have questions, assumptions. Maya's friends, your business associates, everyone is going to want to know what the relationship is between us. So we tell them the truth, that you're the woman I love and Maya is our daughter. But we're not together." "Not like that. Not yet," he agreed. "But Rachel, I never stopped wanting that, never stopped hoping for it. I know we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened, but maybe we can build something new." She was quiet for a long moment. "And if I'm not ready for that? If I need more time? Then I'll wait. I'll wait as long as you need, but please, move into the house anyway. Let me take care of you properly. Let Maya have stability and space and everything she's been denied. You can have your own rooms, your own privacy, whatever boundaries you need. I just want us under the same roof." Rachel studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she finally nodded. "All right. We'll move in, but we take things slow. No rushing, no pressure." "Agreed." The move happened over the course of a week. David assigned them an entire wing of the mansion, giving Rachel and Maya adjacent rooms with private bathrooms, and setting up a comfortable suite for Rachel's mother on the same floor. The space was larger than the house they had been renting, and Maya ran through the halls with obvious delight, exploring every corner. The household staff, which had consisted mainly of a cleaning service and occasional caterers, expanded to include a full-time housekeeper and a cook, both of whom David carefully vetted to ensure they would be kind to Maya and respectful to Rachel. He made it clear that this was their home now, not just his, and that they should be treated accordingly. Maya blossomed in the new environment. She had space to spread out, a library full of books to explore, a piano in the music room that David arranged lessons for. Her artwork began to cover the walls of the mansion, just as it had covered the walls of the small house, and David encouraged every creative impulse. He enrolled her in a good private school, where she made friends easily, her natural warmth and curiosity serving her well. Rachel took longer to adjust. She moved through the mansion as if afraid to touch anything, uncomfortable with the wealth surrounding her, and David had to remind her repeatedly that this was her home. Eventually, she began to relax. She spent time in the garden, which had been neglected for years, and began restoring it to something beautiful. She read books from the library and sat in the sunroom watching birds at the feeders David installed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she started to seem at peace. David continued to give her space, respecting the boundaries she had set. They were not a couple, not technically, but they functioned as a family unit. They ate dinner together each night. They attended Maya's school events together. They made decisions about her education and activities together, and sometimes, late at night when everyone else had gone to bed, they would sit together in the study or the garden and talk the way they used to before everything had fallen apart. 1 year after Maya had first knocked on David's gate selling candy, he organized a small celebration. Not a birthday party, though Maya's actual birthday would come in a few months, but rather an anniversary of sorts, the day that had changed all their lives. He invited no one outside their immediate family, Just Rachel, Maya, and Rachel's mother, who had warmed considerably to him over the months. They ate cake in the garden where wildflowers now grew in abundance thanks to Rachel's careful cultivation. Maya made a speech that was both funny and touching, thanking David for being her dad and Rachel for being the strongest person she knew. David's eyes burned with tears he did not try to hide. When Maya and her grandmother went inside to watch a movie, David and Rachel remained in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air had cooled to something comfortable. "Thank you," Rachel said quietly. "For what? For not giving up. For finding us. For giving Maya the life I never could." David shook his head. "You gave her everything that mattered. You kept her safe, raised her to be kind and brave and smart. I just provided some material comforts." "You provided a father. That's not a small thing." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sunset. Then Rachel reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was not the first time they had touched, but it felt different somehow, more deliberate, more meaningful. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" She turned to look at him directly, to try again. "To be not just co-parents, but partners, if you still want that." David felt his breath catch. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You've been patient and kind and everything I could have asked for. You've proven that what we had before wasn't just youthful infatuation, so yes, I'm sure, if you'll have me." He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, and it felt both familiar and new all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Does this mean we're getting married?" Maya's voice came from the doorway where she had apparently been watching. She sounded delighted. Rachel laughed, wiping her eyes. "We're going to have to talk about it first." "You should definitely get married," Maya said firmly. "It would make us a real family." "We're already a real family," David said. "But yes, I would like to marry your mother." "If she'll say yes." Rachel looked at him, then at Maya, then back at him. "Ask me properly." David stood and went into the house, returning a moment later with a small box he had been carrying in his pocket for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. He knelt in the grass before Rachel and opened the box to reveal a ring, not the same one he had given her 12 years ago, but similar, a symbol of both their past and their future. "Rachel Brennan, will you marry me?" She did not make him wait. "Yes." Maya cheered and ran to hug them both. Rachel's mother appeared in the doorway, smiling through her own tears, and David felt the last piece of his broken heart finally slot back into place. It had taken 12 years, a cruel twist of fate, and a brave child selling candy on a doorstep, but they had found their way back to each other. The lies had fallen away. The truth had set them free, and now, finally, they could build the life that had been stolen from them. The wedding was small and private, held in the garden 6 months later. Maya served as the ring-bearer, wearing a dress she had helped design, her face glowing with happiness. Rachel wore simple white, elegant and understated, and when David saw her walking toward him through the flowers she had planted, he felt the same rush of love he had experienced the first time he had seen her all those years ago. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not just to love each other, but to continue building the family they had fought so hard to protect and reunite. When David kissed his bride, Maya applauded enthusiastically, and Rachel's mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The reception was equally small, just a handful of David's closest business associates who he trusted, and a few of Rachel and Maya's new friends. There were no reminders of the past pain, no acknowledgement of the years lost. This was a celebration of what they had now and what they would build together moving forward. That night, after the guests had left and Maya had been tucked into bed, still buzzing with excitement. David and Rachel stood in the bedroom they would now share, looking out the window at the moonlit garden below. "No regrets?" David asked. "None," Rachel said. "Well, maybe one. I wish we hadn't lost those years. I wish Maya had known you from the beginning. We can't change the past, but we can make sure the future is everything it should be." Rachel leaned against him, his arms coming around her naturally. "I never thought I'd feel safe again. After your mother, after running for so long, I thought fear was just part of who I was. But you've given me safety. You've given us both a real home. This was always meant to be your home," David said. "From the moment I fell in love with you, this place was meant to have you in it. It just took us a while to find our way here." They stood together watching the night, two people who had been torn apart and found their way back through a combination of fate, courage, and love that refused to die. The mansion that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and conversation. The rooms that had held only memories now held a living, breathing family. Maya grew up in that house, surrounded by love and stability. She excelled in school, developed a passion for art and music, and never forgot where she had come from. When she was older, she would volunteer in the neighborhoods where she had once sold candy, using her father's resources to help other families struggling as hers once had. David supported her completely, proud of the compassionate young woman his daughter was becoming. Rachel's health remained stable, and though she never fully regained the strength she'd had in her youth, she lived a full and happy life. She continued to tend the garden, which became something of a local attraction, and started a small business selling flowers and plants, finding purpose and joy in helping things grow. David scaled back his business commitments, delegating more authority to trusted executives, and spent his time focusing on what truly mattered: his family. He and Maya developed a close bond, the kind that comes from genuine understanding and mutual respect. He never tried to make up for the years he'd missed by being overprotective or smothering. Instead, he gave her room to grow, while making sure she always knew he was there if she needed him. Rachel's mother lived with them for 5 more years before passing peacefully in her sleep. By then, she had come to think of David as a son, and she died knowing her daughter and granddaughter were truly safe and cared for. They buried her in a cemetery with a view of the mountains, and Maya planted flowers on the grave every spring. Years passed. Maya graduated from high school with honors, was accepted to several prestigious universities, and chose to study art and social work. David and Rachel attended her graduation with tears in their eyes, remembering the barefoot child who had knocked on a gate selling candy, and marveling at the strong young woman she had become. The night before Maya left for college, the 3 of them sat in the garden one last time, as they had so many times before. The flowers were in full bloom, the air sweet with their scent, and the stars clear overhead. "I've been thinking," Maya said, "about that day I knocked on your gate. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd chosen a different street? If I'd never seen that photo?" David considered the question. "I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer, but I believe some connections are too strong to stay hidden forever." "I used to be angry," Rachel admitted, "about all the time we lost. But now I think maybe things happened the way they needed to. Maya needed to grow up strong and independent, learning resilience and compassion. You needed to learn what really mattered in life, and I needed to learn that I was stronger than I ever knew. We all needed to become who we are now before we could truly be a family." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad I knocked on that gate. Even though I was scared, even though I ran away at first, I'm glad I went back." "So am I," David said. You changed my entire life in about 30 seconds, best 30 seconds of my existence." They sat together until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cool. Eventually, they went inside to the house that had become a true home, filled with the evidence of lives lived together. Maya's artwork, Rachel's gardening books, David's business papers, all mingled together in comfortable chaos. The story that had begun with a child selling candy to help her sick mother had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. A family torn apart by lies and cruelty had been reunited through coincidence and courage. The truth that had been hidden for so long had finally emerged, bringing with it the opportunity for healing and second chances. David often thought about his mother in those years, trying to understand what had driven her to such extreme actions. He would never forgive her for what she had taken from him, from Rachel, from Maya. But he had learned to accept that she had acted from her own twisted sense of love, unable to see beyond her prejudices and need for control. That understanding did not excuse her actions, but it allowed him to make peace with the past. Rachel had also made her own peace. She no longer looked over her shoulder, no longer started at unexpected noises, no longer lived in the constant state of fear that had defined her life for so many years. She had faced her demons, survived them, and come out the other side stronger. The woman who had run away pregnant and terrified had become a woman who could stand tall and claim her place in the world. And Maya, the child who had been born into uncertainty and struggle, had become the bridge that brought them all together. Her courage in returning to the mansion after initially fleeing, her honesty in confronting both her parents with difficult truths, her resilience in adapting to dramatic life changes, all of it had been essential to their reunion and healing. The mansion that had once stood as a monument to wealth and isolation had been transformed into a true home. Its halls echoed with laughter now instead of emptiness. Its rooms were lived in rather than displayed. The garden bloomed with life, carefully tended by loving hands, and the three people who had found each other against all odds continued to build their life together, one day at a time. Sometimes Maya would bring friends home from college, and they would marvel at the size of the house and the obvious love that filled it. She would tell them the story of how she had found her father, a sanitized version that left out the darkest parts but conveyed the essential truth. She was not ashamed of where she had come from, of the poverty and struggle that had shaped her early years. Those experiences had made her who she was, and she carried them not as scars, but as badges of honor. David continued to support various charities focused on helping families in poverty, driven by the knowledge of how close his own daughter had come to falling through society's cracks. He used his wealth and influence to create opportunities for people who reminded him of Rachel and Maya, people who needed just a small break to change their circumstances entirely. It became his life's work, more important than any business deal or investment opportunity. Rachel sometimes gave talks at women's shelters, sharing her story of escaping a threatening situation and rebuilding her life. She spoke honestly about her fears and struggles, about the choices she had made and the consequences they had brought. And she always ended with the message that had sustained her through the darkest times, that love, real love, finds a way to survive even when everything else falls apart. The three of them traveled together, seeing parts of the world none of them had visited before. They made new memories to balance out the years of separation. They laughed together, sometimes cried together, and built the kind of bond that only comes from having weathered genuine hardship and come out intact on the other side. And always, hanging in the hallway of the mansion, was the photograph that had started everything, the image of young David and Rachel, happy and in love, frozen in that moment before tragedy struck. They kept it there not as a reminder of pain, but as evidence that their love had always been real, had always been worth fighting for. Maya would sometimes stop in front of it, studying the faces of her parents before she was born, and she would smile at the knowledge that against all odds, that couple in the photograph had found their way back to each other. The story of how a child selling candy had stumbled into her own father's mansion and uncovered a 12-year-old lie became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Each time it was shared, the miracle of their reunion felt fresh. Each time they marveled at the odds and the coincidences that had brought them together. But underneath the miracle was something more fundamental, the simple truth that love, when it is real and deep and genuine, refuses to die. It may be hidden for years, buried under lies and fear and separation. It may seem impossible to recover. But it persists, waiting for the moment when it can emerge again, when the barriers keeping it contained finally crack and crumble. David and Rachel had loved each other 12 years ago. That love had survived despite everything that had tried to destroy it, and when given the chance, it had bloomed again, stronger for having been tested, deeper for having been thought lost. They had been given a second chance that most people never receive, and they cherished it completely. Maya watched her parents grow old together with satisfaction and joy. She had given them that chance by being brave enough to knock on a stranger's gate, by being curious enough to look at a photograph, by being strong enough to confront difficult truths. She had been the catalyst that had set everything in motion, and she carried that knowledge with pride. Years later, when Maya had children of her own, she would bring them to the mansion and tell them the story of their grandmother who had run away to protect her child, and their grandfather who had never stopped loving her, and the brave little girl who had brought them all together by selling candy on a hot summer day. The children would listen with wide eyes, and then they would run through the same halls their mother had once run through, playing in the same garden, looking at the same photograph. And David and Rachel would watch them together, hands intertwined, grey-haired now, but still with that same love shining in their eyes. They had lost 12 years, but they had gained a lifetime together, and that was more than most people ever received. The past could not be changed, but the future stretched before them bright with possibility. The mansion stood as testament to the power of truth and the resilience of love. It had seen darkness and loneliness, had been filled with lies and secrets, but in the end it had become a home, a real home, built on honesty and courage and the unbreakable bonds of family. The lies had fallen, the truth had emerged, and 3 people who had been torn apart had found their way back to each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. That was how their story ended, not with tragedy or separation, but with love and reunion and the quiet satisfaction of having fought for something worth having and won. The child who had knocked on a gate selling candy had found her father. The woman who had run in fear had found her way home. And the man who had mourned a love he thought was lost had discovered that some things are stronger than lies, stronger than time, stronger than anything that tries to destroy them. Love endures, truth emerges, and family, real family, finds a way to come together even when every force in the world tries to keep them apart. That was the lesson written into every corner of the mansion, into every flower in the garden, into every smile exchanged between the 3 people who had refused to accept that their story was over. They had written a new ending together, and it was exactly the ending they deserved.